And I'm delighted to be here and talk to you and give you what I hope will be a provocative and insightful and helpful presentation. It's not what I would call an academic presentation, but it's rigorous. And everything I've got to say in here is based on evidence which either we or others have collected. It's interesting, before I came here, my immediate appointment was in the House of Lords to talk to Baroness Greengross about a cornerstone of policy in British science at the moment, which is research impact and public involvement and public value. So this is really front and centre in terms of developments in science policy in the United Kingdom. What I'm going to do is just explain a little bit about what Age UK is, because that will help you to understand the perspective on which we have. Then I'll review what the current situation is on involvement. It will largely be based upon UK data, but as you'll see, we are an organisation which has been involved across Europe. So some of that will be comprehensive and applicable to all of the nations in Europe. I'll look at why older people are excluded from research. That might surprise you, some of the things I'm going to say there. And from the point of view of this session, the seminal part of my presentation, how can we improve the involvement of older people in medical research, and are we making progress? And I just refer you to the title of my research, which is Involving Older People in Medical Research. And the model I'm going to describe is more global than clinical trials. So we're not just talking about randomized clinical trials, we're talking about medical research. And in many ways, I think you could paraphrase that and say health research. The Age UK group is very large. It's part social enterprise and part charity, and it's difficult for me to find an analogous organisation in Europe or even in the United States. The nearest I suppose you could get to is the AARP in America, but they have a membership and are largely involved in no research, whereas we have no membership and we are research heavy. And in terms of our research, we have three preeminent activities. One is funding and commissioning research in a number of areas, about £3 million a year. We have a particular biomedical-focused program called Research into Aging, and many of the big names in aging research in the United Kingdom, like Tom Kirkwood and Alan Walker, some of you might know those names, we have funded those. We funded the first piece of research which gave a genetic interest in dementia. That was Professor Sir John Hardy. And more importantly, when we have findings from research and when we carry out our reviews of research, we then translate these research to provide an evidence base for policy, practice, products and services. And especially important to us is that we develop mutually beneficial research relationships at all levels. And that's right from grassroots organizations, what we call the forum movement in the United Kingdom, 620 autonomous, democratic, self-governing bodies with no central government funding. We involve ourselves with those, right the way up to the United Nations. Some of you may know, on the 4th of April, it's World Health Day. The theme of World Health Day is aging, and there's one product, major product being launched, and that's an Age UK product, and it's about how to transfer knowledge from evidence to improve the health of older people in low to middle income countries. So those are the kind of relationships we have. Now, in terms of the current situation, where are we? Well, I'll summarize the current situation by extracting a quotation from Marion McMurdo's paper. Some of you may know Marion McMurdo. She's the chair of the Asian Aging Group for the National Institute of Health Research in the United Kingdom. She's from Dundee University, and she published a paper on which I gave advice, and that is all about improving the recruitment of older people into research, and research generally, not just clinical trials. And there it is, widespread evidence. And Antonio, in the previous presentation, gave us good reason to believe that this is an extant phenomenon. Widespread evidence of the exclusion of older people from clinical research and of their under-recruitment to clinical trials. Working for Age UK and as a scientist, I'd regard this as absolutely scandalous. And here's an example, no doubt in the PREDICT study. This is one of the papers which they extracted in their review, and this shows a study. It's a bit dated. It was published in The Lancet in 1994, but is it any surprising that there was a non-significant 1% absolute reduction in mortality in the group greater than 70 years when less than 10% of the population of that trial was in older patients? And that's not untypical. And of course, this kind of age bias leads to a number of characteristics of medicine, which I'm sure you're all familiar. It leads to the uncertainty of risks and benefits of new treatments, the undertreatment of older people, delays in bringing new treatments to older people, and also bias in practice. And I would say that probably age bias is reflective of a prejudice against older people, and that prejudice is not excluded from physicians, scientists, and the academic world generally. And I say that as an academic. So what I want to put to you is what you might regard as a new paradigm of PPI, public and patient involvement. Now, there's a passé and anachronistic model of the involvement of people in research, which looks at patients or as individuals as merely subjects. That has now moved, and there's been considerable progression in our conception of how older people should be involved, where patients participate in all areas of the study. Now, that's a general principle, and there are some caveats on that, because the extent to which you can involve older people at all levels of research depends upon the nature of the research. And certainly if you consider the sociology of medicine on the one hand, or molecular genetics on the other, you can see there's probably some differences in the way in which they would want to go about it. But it's now an established goal of science policy in the UK. It goes to the principle of science being used as a generation of wealth and innovation, and of also producing improved research impact on the basis that the public provides many millions of euros and pounds to produce research. But beyond that, there's also a more general agreement that the quality of research and its impact are improved by patient-public involvement. Now, this is what I mean by a new paradigm. That's the passé model. Expert questions set by scientists who produce a technical methodology, who produce expert data, which is then disseminated to an unsuspecting public in the hope that you'll get some knowledge transfer. What I would like to propose instead is this model, an interactive model of knowledge transfer, where users are involved at all stages in the research. And there's some classic examples of that in British research at the moment. The New Dynamics of Aging is the biggest aging research program we've had in the UK, £23 million. I chair one of the knowledge transfer steering groups for a study called Halcyon. In Halcyon, we've used this methodology. So right from the conception of the program, before it was put into the research councils for funding, users, including older people, were involved in putting that program together, and they were involved at every stage of the research. We had representatives who talked to the principal investigators of all the work packages in that large program, and it was a €3 million program over 4 years, and it was looking at a meta-analysis of all the 9 longitudinal studies in the United Kingdom. So that's the model that I would put to you. Now, let's go and reverse the argument and have a look at why older people are excluded from research as opposed to why they should be included. Well, if we examine that model, and I review in my experience the attitudes that I've received in the academic world, first of all, you get the rejection of the premise that anyone should be involved in research other than experts. I had a serious debate on that with a professor from America at the British Gerontology Society conference last year in the United Kingdom, where it's an expert process, don't need user involvement. There's also resistance to change, so even where the basic premise is accepted and people do accede to the notion that older people or users should be involved, they're resistant to it. And I suppose that's a natural conservatism in science. The next issue, the unavailability of models of good practice, in my view, is an excuse, because I'll show you later there are many examples of good practice which can serve as a model for the engagement of older people in research. Certainly the absence of adequate resources has been a problem in the past, but increasingly in the United Kingdom, unless you involve older people in your research proposals, the research councils won't give you the money. And it can't be tokenism. It's got to be a substantial, meaningful relationship that you establish with your users. And because they make it a requirement, they also produce money to enable you to meet the logistics, because user involvement is quite an expensive process, excuse me. Now, I mentioned ageism early, and what I want to do is to illustrate that by two types of data. Some quantitative data from a survey that we've done Age UK, and we also took part in a European-wide social survey which showed us the same features. And then I want to produce what might be some shocking qualitative evidence of ageism. There are some data. These clearly show that older people suffer age discrimination. It's pervasive and it's widespread, and it goes into the professions in Europe, and it goes into medicine in Europe, and it goes into the academic world in Europe. And I just highlighted at the bottom one of those. It's a recent study, only a few years old. In a study of patients at a stroke unit, 4% of patients aged 75 and above were given an MRI scan compared to 26% of those under 75. So there's a prima facie case there for age discrimination. Now, I'm going to show you two photographs now, and these were provided to me by a leading geriatrician in Europe, Rudy Westendorp from the Netherlands, who put a photograph into an art exhibition in The Hague, and that photograph was asked to be removed. This was one of the photographs that wasn't asked to be removed. So that was an acceptable female image that everyone who visited the art exhibition were quite pleased to see. But the gallery in question removed that photograph on the basis of complaints generally from a wide spectrum of people who went into there. And Rudy said to me that in part it explained to him why in the last 10 years in care homes in the Netherlands, health outcomes hadn't improved for older people, and he put it down to an incipient level of age discrimination. And I'm not picking on the Netherlands for any of our brethren here from the Low Countries, right? This could be just as applicable to any of our countries who've done it. It's certainly applicable to the United Kingdom. So now we run to the question, how can we improve the involvement of older people? Well, I referred to models of good practice earlier. There are many good models. I'm going to refer to Predict later, but this is a study by Elizabeth Tolmie from Glasgow in the United Kingdom, understanding why older people participate in clinical trials. And there's very many good recommendations in that. And I think these slides will be available afterwards if you want to pick up that reference. And this is the McMurdo paper, Improving the Recruitment of Older People to Research Through Good Practice. That went through without almost any amendments in Age and Aging, and it's a long paper. It's 7 pages long, which is quite large for Age and Aging, and that's full of practicalities about what you can do yourself as physicians, scientists, industrialists from all sectors to improve older people going into research. Now, these are some of what I call the golden principles. I'm going to provide 2 slides of these to show you what you can do to improve the recruitment of older people. And this goes to answer Tom's question earlier about ethical committees and everything else. We are fortunate in the United Kingdom because we have an organisation that I work for called Age UK, which has got 170 local branches, all of whom will help you, if you're a physician in England, to get patients onto your clinical trials. And that's been tremendously effective. And also, we sit on all the research council bodies for commissioning. We have relationships with all the professional bodies and so on. And this is all about securing a climate and a context conducive to the involvement of older people. And it's right from the shop floor in the hospital right up to the Medical Research Council. Right? And that's one of the factors that the World Health Organization is going to publish on April the 4th when it launches its product on how to improve research impact, securing that climate. And the second one I would say is equally important. In fact, this is a critical one. You can't just sit in an ivory tower of research and then expect to find older people come to you to take part in your studies. Yes, that sometimes happens, but generally speaking, you have got to make the bridge, and you do it by establishing good relationships with the older community, carers, external stakeholders, and intermediary organizations like ourselves, like charitable bodies. Make use of existing research networks. There are researchers who know how to do this. There are professional bodies who know how to do this. For example, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom has a body called Involve, and Involve is all about helping people to get patients involved in their research. The National Institute of Health Research has got clinical research networks, which can also help you. You've also got to consider the numbers involved. I know that certainly in the United Kingdom, some of the funding bodies have removed research grants from universities on the basis that they haven't met their recruitment milestones. because it's immoral to try and carry out research if you haven't worked out how to recruit the numbers that will give you the power to produce the effect size to show causality. It's immoral. So what you've got to do is to look at the method, and I think that was referred to earlier. Are you the exclusion or the inclusion criteria too lax or too strict? And the screening to recruitment ratio and the likely rate of attrition. Now, we heard from Antonio some strategies to make involvement, the involvement of older people easier, and I totally accept some of those, including feeding back the results of your research to older people. The days when you can have someone to come into the research and forget about them once they've taken part should be over. At the very least, they'll just go and tell all their neighbours and friends and families, don't bother to take part in research, because the researchers will just use you in their experiment and not give you the data afterwards. And you don't make the user process friendly. We're very, very poor at that. And finally, integrating older people at all stages of the research is a reference to the model. Now, finally, are we making any progress? Well, sometimes we are. On those figures, from 1981 to 2001, the BMJ isn't, the Lancet is, New England Journal is, Heart is not, and Circulation is. And up until 2 years ago, that was still true about the BMJ and Heart, and it's no longer true. So well done, those organizations. But you can see there, those, all those data there show that we're making progress over the last 3 decades. Now, some develops in Europe which might be interesting to you. The days when you could actually get money for funding from Europe without including people in your research, right, are fast coming to an end. This was the European Research Area on Aging Phase 2 report, submitted to Brussels in 2005, and in the priority recommendations top 5, there we asked the DG Research to produce a commitment to user involvement. Okay, that was in 2005. Then we had the predict chart in 2009, and you've heard all about that. I was involved in Future Age. Future Age has now launched its findings and produced a roadmap for aging research for the next 10 to 15 years. DG Research has accepted the findings. I led the work package on user involvement and research, and one of our recommendations was no funding without involvement. Okay, and that has gone to DG Research. Thank you for listening.